All right, so my presentation is called This Dreamer Cometh, and that is a reference to, you remember Joseph in the Bible, he had the coat of many colors, and I just used my favorite Old Testament prophet. I don't know, there's something about it. For one thing, he's a dream analyst, which is what I want to be. Mm-hmm. And he's sort of like kind of out there, he's a dreamer, and he wasn't actually supposed to be he wasn't supposed to receive the succession, right? He was the youngest child, and he just had a knack for dreams. God didn't even tell him anything. He just had this knack for dream analysis, and it made a huge difference for him guiding his life and his people. So I kind of think he's really neat, and I like the idea that we can tease out through an intuitive process and by looking at our internal world guidance that can be very powerful. So. I guess we all start our journey, and I certainly did, starting to discover one at a time in no particular order attributes of ourselves and qualities and biographical things that turn out to be important in some way. I discovered when I was about 15 that I was adopted, and that figures. I find that I'm very introverted and that I'm very extroverted. I'm creative. I do art and poetry, and I thought that's why when I first entered college, I tried to be an artist. I'm artistic, but I don't have the patience to do that all day, right? I have a love of words, and I love dream analysis, and I discovered at some point, partly through having close relationships with very intuitive male role models in my life, several of them, one of whom was my father, that intuition is a very real and powerful thing. And I was always taught that only women had access to it, and I don't know that that's very true. I think that there may be a piece of it, like without trying, there may be a very easy aspect of it, but that there is such a thing as intuitive, sensitive men, and that can be a very powerful thing. And that's Joseph too, in a nutshell, really. And it's a problem too, because especially I'm entering psychology, and that's a science, and science has scant regard for things like intuition. This is an ascientific idea in itself. Re-entering college now in late life, now that I know that I'm not an artist, and I know for sure that I'm a psychologist and I'm a dream analyst, whatever use the world will have for such a thing, that's who I am. I found academia to be very difficult, and because I didn't know who I was supposed to be at an early age, some people figure that out early, I always felt like a failure and a fraud in my life. And re-entering Belmont with this understanding of who it is that I'm supposed to be in the professional sense and what it is that I really want to do, I now have a greater sense of courage. Not that anything about me was cowardly before, but knowing who you are gives you a kind of power, right? And so I just was reminded of this one scene where Han Solo, he's chasing a whole bunch of stormtroopers, right? Which is a very brazen thing to do. And that's kind of how it felt re-entering college. It felt like, and then, but it's a back and forth. And so here's me re-entering college, right?
Certainly has courage.
Right. But then in a moment you'll see what happens around exam time. That's exam time. Right? But it's a saga, right? That's why there's many. That's why there's a trilogy, and then there's the prequel. So, key learning moments. Instead of looking at specific events, because I find that they cluster around themes, I sort of thought of them as themes. I find that I'm smarter than I thought I was. And so I always, there's a part of me that's super surprised that I'm making it and that I'm doing certain things and getting reasonably good grades and writing papers that I'm proud of every now and then. I also find that I'm not as smart as I thought I was, because there's this completely opposite part of me that thinks that I'm smart, that like, oh, the professor doesn't really understand this as well as I do. And that keeps turning around on me, and I keep standing corrected. But it's very interesting that the self-doubter and the self-hater and the self-aggrandizer, it's like, when can I get to where they sit and talk and get like a real view of who I am, right? And so those two themes are kind of connected in this way. And the deeper I go into my discipline, the more balance I get about who I am in this situation. I find that I have to get comfortable with difficulty and discomfort and things like fatigue, stress, and I find that saying that and thinking that is not the same thing as living it out. It's just that there's a whole lot of years. Every year I get a little bit better at not panicking when I know that there's something that I have to worry about or a deadline that I have to keep, and not thinking that I'm a failure because I could be more prepared. We're all doing things in the last minute is what I'm realizing when I look around. So, the circuitous route is often the right path. I don't know, that's very hard for me to put my finger on, but I keep getting back to it, and a lot of it is like, I'll look at this dense passage in a textbook or something, and I just want to pound my way through it and force myself to understand it, and I can't manhandle my own process that way. Sometimes I have to like circle around it like a shark and take bites out of it, or ask questions, or just take a break from it. And that's not a lack of focus, it's self-patience, I think. And I find that once I'm able to detach myself from something that I'm really struggling with in that way, that's when the breakthroughs somehow come in. And maybe that's because, again, I'm an intuitive creature. So if I'm working from a top-down approach, I just don't work efficiently, and I don't see clearly that way. So I have to slow down my pace, or I end up going backward. If I let someone get me down, it'll be me that's down, not them. And I've seen again and again where I've had, on occasion, I've had miserable experiences in lab groups, or I've had a miserable professor. Not really here so much, thankfully, but it happens. And if I try not as hard because of those things, or I hurt the integrity and the nobility of my academic and interpersonal process, it's my grade that's at stake, and it's my education and my wisdom, the loss of a chance that suffers. So this is attributed to Albert Einstein. It might be apocryphal, but it is in a book. So I've got the site there. Everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life being that thing, believing it's stupid, right? Meaning perspective. Well, I come from the Baha'i community, and Baha'u'llah teaches us that the world is but one country and mankind is citizens. I was taught that from a child. But every day that I'm alive, it seems like I'm constantly engaging this as a fundamental verity. And it's not different from what other religions teach, really, but it is central, and it is very much something that we're overt about. I'm reminded of Jung saying something that ties in the idea of dreams and the sense of wholeness. It says the world is in him indistinguishable from nature and bare of all egohood. It is from these all-uniting depths that the dream arises. So when we think about worldview, I mean, literally there's a period in history where we began to conceive of the world as a circle, and not just any circle, but a three-dimensional circle, and just to realize that if you walk in a straight line in any direction long enough, you'll end up, if you were able to cross the ocean, you'll end up back where you started. So that is a beautiful concept. This oneness of the world is something that is very powerful, and it's a breakthrough awareness that only man has been able to fully grasp. And to have this image taken from outer space of our home is it's a beautiful miracle that we all get to enjoy. Meaning perspective, yeah, so this is from back when I was studying art. This is my favorite painting that I did. It was done in pastel, or not pastel, but pencil crayon. And I didn't, the interesting thing is I didn't know why I was painting this, but the image came to me and I had to paint it just like it is.
Oh, what? So that's your artwork?
Yes.
Wow.
And, but the interesting thing about it is, and this is the thing that's so beautiful about art, is that this really, you know, I think as an arts therapist would have said, you were supposed to be a psychologist. Because this is like, how do I even explain, like, I spent so much of my time in conversation, and the kinds of conversations I always gravitate towards are what I guess you might have to call therapeutic conversations, where there's some kind of healing and introspection involved. That's just the kind of conversation that I love. And, you know, I'll do it for free. And, you know, back then there was a lot of coffee and smoking. And my coffee table always had diverse company. And you know, it turns out that fish is one of these universal dream symbols for the unconscious, because a fish is something that lives under the surface, and you don't, unless you go down there, you don't even know that they're in there. You can look at a lake and have no idea the life that's teeming underneath the surface. And so, and you have this very dreamlike swimming through this atmosphere where conversation is taking place, right? So, you know, we all have to, I think, participate in things like art, and I think that we all have to participate in things like therapy. And so, you might have a grandmother that may be a better therapist than I'll ever be, and she may not ever call herself that, and it doesn't really matter. But again, it's like this idea of wholeness, right? And that's what the world is heading towards, and that's what we're heading towards individually. So this is by Jung. He says, the whole is in him, indistinguishable from nature and bare of all egohood. It is from these all-uniting depths that dream arises. Oh, I included that quote a second time by mistake.
It's very powerful.
I meant to
That's why you wanted it.
Okay, yeah, that's right. That was on purpose. So I will tell you that my favorite Jung quote on dreams is he says, dreams, like everything else we do, has a meaning. That is a very close approximation. It's not exactly what he said, but very close. Like everything else we do, it has a meaning. And if I have a moment, when I was about 18, I had a best friend who, her mother was very, just to give you a taste of what it is that I love, her mother was very overbearing. Both of them were wonderful, sweet people, but that was just their relationship. And this friend of mine, you know, we've done dream work, because I've been doing it since I was a child. And she always was like suspicious. Do you really know what you're talking about? So she comes to me with this dream that she thinks is one that will stump me. And she I had this dream last night. Let's see if you know what this means. And she says, well, I dreamed that I cascaded down a dangerous waterfall, but I survived. And I stand up at the bottom in this pool where the waterfall ends. And then my mother rises up out of the water, and she has this sword, and she cuts my head off, and takes her own head off and puts it on my head. And she says, and she actually, I think, put her hand on her shoulder. It's funny, it's like a flashbulb memory. I don't know if I'm making that up, but I think she was like doing this, right? Maybe she was doing this with her eyes. But she says, so what do you think that means? And I said, well, you ever feel like your mom is cutting you off or doesn't let you have your own thoughts? And she started to cry. And so that, for me, I think, is the kind of thing that has kept me aware of my purpose. It's to, through being aware of who I am, help others come into an awareness of who they are. And when that recognition is unmistakable, the therapist isn't even involved. You're just, I just asked her a question is all I did. It was just the right question. So that's basically it. But thank you for your time.
I like what you said about the circuitous route is often the right path. You know, I think so often students in the adult degree programs, you know, they have this regret of,
yeah, right.
Why am I here now? Why didn't I finish this earlier? And I've always had that belief that this is the right time for the adult studies students. It is the right time. It's just, but it's hard for people to realize that. I like this.